Yep. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Downfield Read Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jeff D. And with me always here is Shawn from Total Apex Sports and YardBarker. At the coach's desk is where you can find him. And we are going to do a little recap of Week 7 fantasy ball. And we're going to let you know who you should be targeting in your waiver wires this week. There are no buys this week, so everybody should have their full roster. And really at this point, especially after last night, if you were thin on wide receivers, you might be even more thin. Wide receivers are going to be at a premium coming up overnight tonight. So, but Shawn, before we get into that, I would say both of us had a pretty good weekend here.
Yeah.
Your Pittsburgh Steelers stepped up.
Yeah,
when we were all cautious.
I was definitely. As you know, I write a lot of individual DFS articles, and we talked on the show. My reasoning for not starting the quarterbacks was obviously the Jet defense, but it was just so much unknown because you heard that they were going to split quarterbacks at times, both get reps. So obviously that Wilson showed you what he can do for that offense because he brought Pickens to life, but he also had a long, throw to Freiermuth down the middle, so that often, and then when you can't load the box, you saw what Harris can do. So it was one game, so obviously temper expectations, but that's a no joke defense. The Jets are, we talked about how highly rated they were, so we'll see. To sustain, can he sustain? I mean, if he plays like that, the Steelers are a little bit more of a threat.
Yeah. I would say that was and it wasn't just a 1 point or a 3 point game either. They were dominant throughout that whole game.
They did. And that was their largest offensive output of the year at the 37 points too, which beat the 34 the week before, I believe. But that was a different way they got the 37. And Harris took off because he had some running lanes.
Yeah, you know what? Jalen Warren was back, and he got a couple of carries as well, and he put up some points for people. So that offense looks like it could be a scary thing going forward for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Pickens, I think, is in the wide receiver 1 category possibly, or at least a 2 with one upside every week.
Yeah, for sure. And things have gotten a little interesting for both of us in the in the AFC North. Ravens won last night. If anybody saw that one, 2-4-2 teams with Tampa Bay and Baltimore. But not only that, but Cleveland going through some quarterback changes coming up here. Looks like Deshaun Watson ended up tearing his Achilles, and he's going to be out for the year. You don't like to see that. And I know one of the things that people were talking about online was, how could Cleveland Browns fans be cheering for the guy to get hurt? That's no way.
No,
if you got pulled out of the game after playing like crap, okay, fine, cheer. Go ahead and cheer for that. I could agree with that. But
you don't ever want to see anybody do that.
Yeah. So quarterback questions there. Yeah, quarterback questions there in Cleveland. Are they going to go with Jameis Winston? He looked like he was doing pretty good before Dorian Thompson-Robinson got hurt, I guess. So
and ironically, they moved Thompson-Robinson DTR to the. I saw a tweet on it. Ironically, he moved ahead of Winston on the same game that Watson got hurt. So I'm not sure what's going on there as far as I don't. Winston will chuck it around. He's good. I think Winston's better for the overall ancillary players. And we talked about on the show Friday about Njoku was a possible tight end sleeper, and he get involved. I think Jameis is good for those guys. A wide receiver we'll talk about a little bit. But I think DTR is, I think he's probably more of a running quarterback, maybe. I'm not sure. I think Winston's better for fantasy, and that's kind of what you and I talk about.
I think it's almost
real life. I mean, I don't know if it matters much. Their defense is darn good, though. They have a good defense.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it becomes kind of a situation like what they've got in Indianapolis right now with Anthony Richardson versus Joe Flacco. Which one is going to be better for the team, and which one is going to be better for your fantasy team? Obviously, they don't care about that, but you get into that kind of a situation where, the Cleveland Browns, they do have a very stellar defense. So they just need a guy who's not going to turn over the ball. So who's that going to be? Is it going to be a guy like Jameis Winston who's going to air out the ball? He'll probably throw 20 touchdowns, but 20 interceptions.
Yeah.
Or is it going to be a guy who might control it a little bit more and not put up as many points?
When we talked about in the show Friday, I know I had Richardson as my dud spot or fade spot, whichever one you use, and we talked about if you had people in the Colts in your team, fantasy assets, you didn't want Richardson, you wanted him, and to just like we said, he's QB 22 last week, 10 for 24, 41% completion percentage, 129 yards. Now they had more design runs for him, but I think they designed runs for him because they don't want him throwing the ball.
Right. Well, and Indianapolis got the dub last week, so
he nukes all the Colts. He just does. Yeah. Outside of maybe Taylor. Now Taylor will probably be back this week, but so that'll help, obviously.
Yep.
But
all right. Well, let's get into the top of the ticket here, which is our quarterbacks, and I had for week 7 here my must starts for the week. A couple of those came true. I had Baker Mayfield number 1, and he actually finished 2nd overall last night with 27 points. Regardless of both Evans and Godwin going out there. And then I had Lamar Jackson, who finished number 1, obviously. Jackson, 5 touchdowns. And then Jaden Daniels, who, again, finished in the top 10 there. Jaden Daniels, who did not finish that game, but his backup, Marcus Mariota, finished in the top 10 there. I think Mariota had about 19.5 points.
He did, and he finished as QB8.
Yeah. So really, and there you're just kind of playing against the defense, right? So look at who's playing Carolina this week. If a guy like Mariota can put up 20 damn points against Carolina, then, Mariota's not a stud. He's not an MVP. He's not a Pro Bowler even, but those were my guys. And then I had as my must sit, you mentioned him before, Anthony Richardson, who put up 8 3/4 points. And then I had Joe Burrow. I was worried about him going up against Cleveland, which we just talked about having a good defense. And I think he finished outside of the top 12. He was somewhere 15 points, which is what I told a couple of people online too, where I expect to see him was 13 to 15, somewhere in that range where he wasn't going to have to do too much. So there we go. And then the sleepers, I had Drake May, 21 points. He's, top quarterback this week. Bo Nix, who finished with 14. I think he just finished outside of the top 12. Yep. And then Darnold, who finished with 16.25. So low-end quarterback number 1 there.
Yep, that segues into me because I had Darnold in my highlight, and he finished at QB 13. And then I had him in my stack with Jefferson, and that got you a touchdown. And they finally decided to throw the ball at Jefferson after they decided not to feature him, which was mind-boggling. And then I had Daniels McLaurin stack that went out. Daniels only gave you the 5 points on the 50 yards rushing. He gets hurt. I was a little disappointed in the Stroud Love game. I thought that would be just looking at numbers. I thought Love. I recommended Love in the stack. He can't finish at QB 12, but Stroud, I gotta find him here. He disappointed at QB 28. So that one I thought would feature a little bit more. So I missed on the Stroud one, but the Love and Darnold worked out good. And then, you can't predict the injury. Daniels obviously was good. And I tried to give people in my column, I always try to offer it. I could sit here and write a column, this with all chalk, but it's not it's not realistic in 2 ways. There's no way you can build a DFS lineup with all chalk. And then number 2, you got to offer, you have to try to step out and find the value for the viewers so they can build a lineup with a combination of a Jefferson, but then you're going to have to save money elsewhere. You can't start Jaden Daniels, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and AJ Brown every week in DFS because you're going to run out of salary.
Yeah, and I think Love just finished right outside of he was number 12 on the week.
Yeah, he was 12 on the week, which is okay. I just thought he didn't get the back and forth with Stroud, which I thought we would get.
Yeah, didn't get the high expectations out of that game.
Yeah, Stroud had 5.3 points, which is 10 for 21, 47. That's not him. 86 yards. That's not that's just not a game you'd expect. Especially you expected some back and forth. But the Packer defense is a little underrated. They're not terrible.
No, and I know that hurt one of my wide receiver recommendations, Diggs on the week as well. Diggs did not do well. CJ Stroud didn't do well, so none of them did.
Nope.
But who do you got for recommendations now? If people are plucking off of the Week 8 waiver wire, what kind of targets are you looking at?
Yeah, I'll speak from a personal standpoint because the league I'm looking at for quarterback is I have Daniels, so I have to assume that he is not going to play with the rib, and if he is, he's so risky. But in leagues I'm looking at, in the league I'm referring to, Tua is out there, so I have a claim in on Tua. He's 43% rostered, and I'm going off of what Fantasy Pros has. Drake May at 18%. You already spoke about him last week. He's out there. A little tougher matchup this week against the Jets defense, I believe. Wilson's out there. He's someone. We talked about Bo Nix last week. So I'm kind of, and then miraculously, I have no idea how this is possible, but Caleb Williams is available in the one league I'm speaking of. So he would be number one for me, obviously. And then I'd be Tua behind him because Tua, I think, is in a great spot to come back with the Arizona, and you should see some points there. It's got a 47 and a half implied total. So, but yeah, and I like Nix. I have Nix in our fantasy turf war, and he didn't kill me with 13 points. So we talked about that in the show, you and I, about how he's serviceable because he had I think he had 75 yards rushing last week.
Yeah.
And let's see, he finished at QB 17, not horrible. The passing numbers weren't great, but he had 75 yards rushing on 10 totes. So that is huge. You don't have to go crazy with the passing game if you can get a guy that's going to give you 7.5 on the points on the ground right there. So.
Yeah, and even Daniels, if he was healthy, still going up against that Chicago defense, which is pretty good. So whether it's Daniels or Mariota, they're probably going to end up being one of my sits, but we'll find out on Friday.
And you already mentioned Mariota. If you're really in a jam, you could do worse.
You could do worse, yeah. And I'm looking at a couple of my leagues that I'm in. You mentioned a few people. Obviously, Drake May, who he's a top quarterback right now for overall, and he's a legit top tier quarterback. And he's only owned by, you said 18%.
Yeah,
20%.
Yep. We got 18% in fantasy leagues. That's all Fantasy Pros. That's kind of a little bit of everything. And you know what? And Jeff, he was QB 6 last week.
Yeah.
So I believe he was a QB. While you go ahead, I'll look it up while you go ahead and finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
In week 6, I'll give you what he was in week 6 too.
And for a guy overall this year, Bo Nix is owned by less than 20%. And his schedule, when you look at now comes the time of the year, we're halfway through this point. I start looking at schedule matchups for the rest of the year. Bo Nix has got an easy looking schedule.
Yes,
and he's 13th overall year to date in fantasy points for quarterbacks. How this guy is not owned in more than 20%, I have no idea, because he's a legit starter almost every week here for the rest of the year.
Yep.
And then obviously we talk about Russell Wilson. He's owned by less than 10% of leagues. If you're looking for a quarterback there, he looks like the real deal. He finished very strong, obviously. And then how about, this guy might not be around in all leagues. He's owned in 65%, but Geno Smith is actually 6th year to date.
Volume passer.
And 65%. So 35% of leagues out there, you got a 1 in 3 chance of actually picking up Geno Smith, which I think is ridiculous. He's not available in either one of the leagues that I'm competitive in. But yeah, those would be my week 8 waiver targets for quarterbacks. And you got to be able to get one of these guys. One of these guys is going to be available.
Yep. Now, the easiest schedule coming up, to your point, talk about looking ahead. So coming up here in the next few weeks, easiest quarterback schedule: Minnesota, Green Bay, Chicago, Giants, Miami. So there's Tua. I mean, you're not starting Daniel Jones unless you're desperate and super flex, obviously. But there, Caleb Williams, I talked about him. Someone dropped. And sometimes what ends up happening, just not to get off, is people will go crazy and draft a lot of quarterbacks, and that's fine. But then once the bye weeks start, injuries, they'll drop these quarterbacks because they can't keep them because they can't fill a roster, and that's how Williams can become available this late in the year. So I think pretty sure that's what happened to mine. And then Darnold and Love have easiest. Toughest: Arizona, Chargers, Buffalo, Indy, New England. New England, it starts this week because of the Jet thing. And May, because I looked it up while you were talking about. He finished off the bench as QB 12 in week 6.
Nice.
So
not bad, not bad. So there's your quarterback waiver wire. Moving along, unless you've got anything else to add to the quarterbacks.
Nope, that's it.
All right. Moving on to the running backs from last week. My must starts were Kyron Williams. He finished with 19.5. He finished in your top 12, I'm sure. Bijan Robinson, another good starter for last week, finished with about 22 points. He was in top 10. And then Kenneth Walker, the third from Seattle, finished in the top 10 as well. He had 22.3 points. Those were all my running back number ones. My running back number twos didn't fare so well. I said Brian Robinson Jr., who was questionable at that point in time. He finished 16th with 13 points. J.K. Dobbins, who was disappointing last night, not sure how they bottled him up so well.
I don't know
only finished with 8 points last night.
You and I
was busy watching the Ravens game, and I didn't have a chance to look over the film from last night, so I don't know what Arizona did.
Yeah, he was in a smash spot. I don't know what happened there. I watched a little bit of it, but yeah, I don't know why he didn't. He should have been better.
And then I said Chase Brown against Cleveland. I figured there was going to be more running there, but Cincinnati decided that they didn't really want to wake up for that game, and he finished with only 6.5 points on the game there, and that was somewhere around 30th. So definitely out of that top 24 for running backs that you'd want to put in there. Sleepers on the week. I had Achane, who thought he was going to end up doing better. He finished with 9.5. That was good for about 23rd, 24th. Javonte Williams, who was a top 5, and then Madison, who actually finished with 13.8, which put him right kind of in the middle of the pack there, 16th. He was a high-end running back number 2 overall on the week last week.
Yeah, I had with you, I had recommended Chase Brown as a start, and from the numbers wise, he's basically taken over that backfield. And they kind of use Moss more in the passing, but he only had 7 fantasy points. Like Brian Robinson Jr., 13 points. Okay, did have the touchdown on 12 totes for 71 yards. That's not, that wouldn't have killed anybody. The Brown one was a little disappointed in. I really, really thought he would do well, but not to ignore the Cleveland defense. And then another one of my starts, I had Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard did okay, got smacked and left the game for a little bit, got evaluated for concussion. He finished okay. He had decent numbers. I have to look it up here, but he ended up with he finished up in the RB 30s, but he had plenty of opportunity. RB 31, but 16 carries for 61 yards and 6 targets in the passing game. So on the recommendations, the numbers are there. Just the touchdowns you can't predict. But I thought the Tennessee, they hung in there as best they could, considering they actually had a quarterback that's serviceable. They're apparently going to go back to Levis. That's what they said. They want to get him healthy, and they're going to go back to him. But didn't quite pop what I thought. Robinson scored a touchdown. Pollard had the volume, just didn't get in there. He left a little bit. And then my sits for running back, Ty Chandler. Aaron Jones ended up playing and doing pretty well. So if you had Chandler, if you didn't use Chandler, that was fine. And then sits, I missed on this one, and that was Najee Harris.
Yep.
I thought Najee would have, for what I've seen, I couldn't recommend anything to the Steelers. We talked about before we came on air, what was Wilson, what was going to happen with Wilson. Obviously, it was very good. It was positive. And when Harris had some running lanes, and you saw how well, so I missed on that one. But it was just hard to recommend any Steelers because we only had what we want to go off. You didn't have any film on Wilson to see what the effect was. So if you did great. But I just couldn't recommend him with so much unknown.
Yeah, and that was one of mine as well, was Najee Harris, and that was the big thing, is the unknown with Russell Wilson coming in there. You just don't know. Nobody knew that Pickens was going to go off for 19.5 points. Nobody knew that.
There's another one. Yep.
Russell Wilson was going to go off, but I had Aaron Jones as well, and I said nor would I start Ty Chandler, but obviously he finished in the top 12, and then I had Bucky Irving in there as well. So I apologize for that one. He wasn't the best running back in the game last night. Rachaad White actually finished number 2 overall on the week.
He sure did.
26 points. And I don't know what happened to the Ravens run defense. That was supposed to be the the best part of their defense. So they were number one against the run, and you had Rachaad White and, Bucky Irving and Shawn, what's his face, who was number 3, and you didn't know who they were going to go to.
Tucker,
so,
yep.
For going up against, one of the best defenses in the league, and then, maybe having a 3-headed monster back there splitting time. But yeah, Bucky Irving finished with 15 points. Kudos to him. And yeah. So, hey, you can analyze all you want, but sometimes that stuff still happens.
Yeah, exactly. You can only, we can just give the recommendations, and we put ourselves out there and we love doing it. But we can only do, we go off the numbers, the matchups, like Pollard, he had the volume, left, still had 17 touches. He left a little bit, but it was a great matchup, but just, he didn't get touchdowns you can't predict.
Yeah. Looking at this week, guys that you can pull off of the waiver, I've got a couple.
Go ahead.
I still think D'Ernest Johnson in Jacksonville is a viable backup. He's owned in less than 10% of the leagues. He did fairly well last week as well. He got you maybe 8.5 points. I'm not saying as a starter, but maybe as a a flex, or if you're in a larger league. Looks like Travis Etienne is going to be out for a little bit yet. So if you are desperate for, and that's basically what all of these are.
Yeah.
If you're desperate for a running back, D'Ernest Johnson is out there. Ray Davis, also not too bad. Only owned by 25%. So it looks like he was splitting time with James Cook in there. So, Ray had 11.2 fantasy points. Cook had 9.2. So Ray Davis might be a viable option. If you have Cook, obviously you're going to want to handcuff him.
Absolutely.
And then I'll say a third one, and then I'll let you go, is Alexander Mattison. We've mentioned him before. I get that Las Vegas is a dumpster fire, but Alexander Mattison is only owned by 54% of leagues, and he did 13.8 points last week. And that's top 20, and he's top 20 year to date.
There's still fantasy numbers out there on those bad teams.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no reason for him to not be owned on any team right now.
At worst, you build depth on your bench.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm going to try to hit the ones so we don't cross over. You talked about handcuffs. I've got 3. Actually, I've got 4 real quick. Kamani Vidal, premier handcuff for J.K. Dobbins. He's out there. He's still in 16% of leagues. Roschon Johnson, 16%. He could be a flex for you. He does get some goal line carries, gets a little bit of usage in the passage game. No doubt Swift has amped it up and, somewhat, well, he has taken that backfield over. Tyler Goodson is the back to own right now. However, beware that, you might have Taylor coming back. But last week, he took over as a lead back. He outcarried Sermon 14-8 and outgained him 51-36, and he scored the Colts only TD. But as we said, Taylor is nearing a return, and he would just take that. He would take all the value out of there in the Colt backfield. Justice Hill somehow is still out there in over 70% of leagues. He took a screen pass last night, went for a nice touchdown. I think that was one of the first Raven touchdowns. So he's out there. I'm surprised he should be owned because he's at least a flex play. And then in deeper leagues, I like Sean Tucker. I think he's the best runner on that team. He's a physical guy. I think he could be something down the stretch. And they are decimated at injury right now on the Bucs, so they could, start running and getting the backs more involved. But that Tucker, if you got a spot for him, I'd stash him.
Yep, absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of mine, and I just got 2 more on my list. Number one, we mentioned before, Jaylen Warren, who's owned in about 45% of leagues. Obviously, running back number 2 behind Najee, but he had 12 rushes for 44 yards and 2 receptions on 3 targets for 15 yards. But here's another one, too. If you're looking, New England, Jermichael Hasty had 18 points, and that was mostly on receptions. He had 5 receptions for 49 yards and a touchdown, which obviously makes those 18 points look a little bit more inflated. But it almost seemed like Gibson was an afterthought, and Hasty might be taking over that running back 2 role. And this is a guy, again, in deeper leagues. Again, if you've got, some bench space, nobody owns this guy. Nobody's even heard of him. He's not owned in any leagues. So you could take a flyer on him. If he does take over that running back 2 role, maybe something unfortunate happens, to Stevenson and he steps into a number one role. You just don't know with that offensive line how that's going to work out. But that's my big flyer, I guess, is if you've got room for him, might not be bad to pick him up on a waiver.
Yeah, definitely. And, that position is so volatile. It changes, week to week. So he could be a guy you pick up and then he might, but if you can hold on to him in 3 weeks, he could end up being a starter for you. And Hasty came out of that 49er backfield. So, he can, he's spent a few times where he was the lead back for them. So he can do it if he has to.
Absolutely. We've got one question about running backs. Michael Chapp, who can I get at running back for Olave? I love Olave, but I'm in the process of pulling off a trade of Gibbs for JJ. No kidding. And want to upgrade at RB2. By the way, you're getting a steal on that one. I know that Gibbs ended last week. He was running back number 1. Montgomery got hurt for a little bit. Gibbs came in, took advantage of that. I had Gibbs. I played Gibbs. That definitely helped me out, so I get it. If you're trying to sell high on Gibbs, Gibbs hasn't been bad throughout the whole year.
No.
But, I mean, if you want to sell on Gibbs for as high as you can get him, I think JJ, I would take that trade any day of the week. I want to upgrade RB2, and Olave will have to be on the bench. Swift or Hubbard for Olave. Is that unrealistic?
I mean, Hubbard's good, but I mean, I guess if you're deep at wide receiver and you need a running back, Swift's been doing really well the last few weeks. So I like Swift. I'm just worried about Hubbard. If they keep losing, does Brooks end up taking over so they can see what they got there? I mean,
that really might be. That's a good point.
I'm not one for probably not Hubbard, but if you could get Swift, and I don't know, I have a lot of Lave's he's a good receiver. I don't know what's going on there. It depends. This is one where I got if you're short at running back, go ahead. But if you can hold on to Olave, now they should get Carr back, if not this week, the week after. But Olave's the clear one. Now you got to remember he doesn't have to deal with Shaheed anymore. Unfortunately, Shaheed got hurt. So when he comes back, he should be a target monster. So if he needs an answer right now, I'm going to say I'm not giving up Olave. There's too much of the season left. That's just me. If you need an answer, that would be for me.
Yeah, there's quite a few positives in there, right? So you've got Olave's questionable. Looks like he's making his way back. It's only Tuesday, obviously, but they've got a bigger game against the Chargers coming up, and his schedule too is pretty favorable throughout the rest of the year. After this upcoming week, they've got Carolina, Atlanta, Cleveland, the Rams, the Giants, Washington. So pretty favorable to wide receivers. You might see some points that, similar to what he put up in week 2, 3, where he's at least getting into the double digits. Especially without, to your point, Rashid Shaheed. So that makes Olave the clear number 1 target.
Yeah.
That they're going to have to throw to. Hopefully Derek Carr comes back and, he's playing well again. So I don't like the idea of giving up Olave unless you've got a lot of wide receivers. And hey, that might be the case. Could you get Swift or Hubbard? I got to tell you, I think it really depends on what those teams have as well. Are they overly stocked in running backs? Because
I like Swift.
To your point, Shawn, if somebody is thinking, hey, Hubbard might not be the starter in another couple of weeks when we're eventually out of the playoff hunt after, week 10.
Because Brooks is back at they have opened up the practice window for him. So you got to remember he's lurking there. And I mean, I got to believe when he's active, he's going to split the carries with him.
And I'm not sure you'd want to go with Swift either, because Chicago has the hardest schedule coming up for the rest of the season. So don't let their good record right now make you believe that they're a good team. They are not a good team. The Chicago Bears are going to fall faster than the Titanic. It's really going to be epic to watch, I think. I think Caleb Williams is going to crumble under the pressure of all of these hard teams that they're going up against. They're going to fall behind, and I don't think Swift is as good as what he has been over the last few weeks. So I'd hang on to Olave.
I'm keeping Olave. That's just me. Look, when you have fantasy, you want to get as many wide receiver ones on your roster as you can. And he's a wide receiver one, and more in which, like I said, with Shaheed out, you're sitting even better. I mean, you got a good matchup this week for the Bears. with Caleb Williams because they're playing the Commanders defense. But to your point, they got a tougher schedule. So
yeah, the guy. I mean, if you got Jay Jetta, that's great.
yeah,
He's always good. You're never going to have Olave play over him.
but
So
you
depending on how
compare if
many
you
wide
compare
receivers you start,
Olave, right, and use
put him in a
Olave as
flex.
your number 2, now you just became real deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just some update stuff for our viewers at quarterback. I'm just backing up 1 second here.
Yeah, sure.
Thompson Robinson injured a tendon on one of his fingers. Oof. So the belief is that he will not. And of course, I did not break this, but it's on Twitter, just so I get credit, just where credit is due.
Your connection with the Cleveland Browns called you, huh?
Yeah. So he will not miss multiple weeks, but obviously, if you have an injured tendon on your finger, so he's going to wear a splint, and it's to be determined. So you had mentioned Jameis. And that also explains why they signed Bailey Zappi to their practice squad. Not that anyone was looking to pick up Bailey Zappi.
Yeah. Not that anybody's looking to pick up Desmond Ridder either, but he just got signed by Las Vegas because it sounds like Aiden O'Connell is going to be missing some time, broken thumb, and Gardner Minshew looked like crap. So,
But I just wanted to give, so we talked, because we moved over, we had passed on quarterbacks. But if you need to put a claim in and you're desperate, looks like the claim would be Jameis.
Yep. That's not a bad one either. He's got wheels too.
If you're like me and you have Daniels, he's not on a bye. He's very iffy. We have to assume he's iffy. And you're in a deep league. The waiver wire's thin. You could, ride him out for a week because he's going to chuck it around. So he could fall into 250 and 2 touchdowns. So
could happen. All right, moving on to 2 wide receivers. Why don't you take this one, Shawn?
All right, so we're going to recap. I had a recommended last week. I don't think anybody would have said I was crazy. I had Malik Neighbors, and I think he had a 4 for 41 game, which was mind-boggling that they could only get him 4 catches. So I had recommended him. I had McLaurin again, as we talked about before. So I missed on those 2 with Daniels getting hurt and other wide receiver starts. I had JJ, which we talked about. Juju ended up as a last-minute scratch, so he was out. So I must have been the jinx for the wide receivers this week. And I recommended Christian Watson because I liked Love. Wicks ended up getting a touchdown over him, and that's the thing with Watson. He's a best ball player. Like, he could go off one week and next week he's like a Gabe Davis. They disappear. Like, he's a great best ball player, but it's just so hard to use him. But he was an inexpensive option in DFS, and I thought, he would be a good one in that. I thought it would be a little bit more of a shootout. So that's kind of where I was at. McLaurin obviously would have been fine had Daniels not gotten hurt. But I was kind of up and down a little bit. So, and then, Juju, I loved him in that role. And the beneficiary of that was Xavier Worthy with his 9 targets. So,
yeah, you know what? I didn't hit that well either, and I appreciate the kudos early on Sunday morning because I had 2 weeks ago
said Thomas, that's for sure.
Yeah, Brian Thomas Jr. I told you to bench, and he was definitely benchable 2 weeks ago. This last weekend, I said he is a must start, and he finishes in the top 4 overall with about 19.5 points. My other must starts, though, I did strike out on. One was Mike Evans. I figured he was going to have a bounce back week. It wasn't terrible. He had 9 points, but obviously then he left with that injury. But then I, as I mentioned before, I had Stephon Diggs, who finished with 5 points. What's going on with Houston's offense is all I can really say there.
Yeah.
My wide receiver 2s that I had mentioned, I said number 1 was, as far as a wide receiver 2, it turns out he's the number 1 wide receiver overall, Amon-Ra St. Brown. 21 points was the top 4 wide receivers last week. And then I struck out on a couple other ones. Deontay Johnson didn't do anything. 2.2 points.
Yeah. And they're always playing from behind. I'm with you. I was like, he's just mind-boggling sometimes, some of these players.
And then I doubled down on Zay Flowers, and it turns out he was not the guy that they were going to go to last week. It turns out it was Rashad Bateman, who finished with 20 points on the week, number 2 overall, right behind Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Number 2.
And to transition into that, pick him up. He's not even owned.
I had mentioned him last week on our Friday show. I told you about getting him if he's out there as like a wide receiver pickup. I do remember. he had a great camp, and they're out of camp. They were talking him up a lot, and I drafted him a lot in best ball. I thought he was going to be he's starting to come on now, maybe so.
Yep. Let me see. My sitters kind of struck out a little bit. I said George Pickens, and again, we don't want to beat that with a dead horse, but the uncertainty there. He went off 19.5 points, was a top 5 guy. I said sit anybody. Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr. Against Miami with Indianapolis. Yep. Pierce finished with 2.5. Pittman finished with 7.5. And then I also said stay away from any wide receivers from New Orleans. But if you guessed Cedric Wilson Jr. was going to have a big day, and I'm guessing nobody did because he was owned by 0% of people. He finished with about 14.5, and then Mason Tipton had 14.5. He was owned by 1% of all fantasy leagues. So go figure.
Hashtag helps no one.
Right? That did not help. You didn't get burned by him anyway.
No.
So there was that. My sleepers didn't do very well either. They were asleep. Tyreek Hill, 1.8 points, and it doesn't seem like Miami cares at all. They're all laughing on the sideline, and I think Mike McDaniel's days are numbered there.
I don't know what his game plans are, but they don't have any kind of a game plan to even get these guys involved. I don't know what they're doing. Like they're lost.
They are terrible. Ladd McConkey finished with 7 points last night, and then Demario Douglas had 2.5, but apparently he was sick and did not play in the game that long. So I know my wife didn't like that one either. She's like, you told me to start him. I said, yes, I did. I didn't know he was going to be sick, though.
Yeah, same thing with Deebo Samuel. He had an illness, then he said he was okay, and he came in, and then they pulled him, and he ended up in the hospital. So they obviously these teams are not very forthcoming with their injury reports a lot of times. Obviously, Samuel was a lot sicker than they thought. They said illness, and people, there's a lot that goes into this, and the NFL knows that, because if it wasn't, and I'm not going to go preach here, but if it wasn't for sports handicapping and fantasy, the NFL would not be anywhere near as popular as it is now, because no one's watching some of these games unless they've got some stock in it. And they're just injuries. They just, look what they did with McCaffrey. 49ers were completely dishonest with McCaffrey, and you're looking at week 10 before you can use him.
Yep. It's pretty bad. Nobody's paying $700 for an NFL Sunday ticket just to watch games because they want to.
Exactly. We wouldn't even watch half of those games.
Yeah. So let's see. Getting into guys that you could pick up, wide receivers. Obviously, we mentioned Godwin. Tampa Bay is going to need, you're going to have an uptick in wide receivers there. So I might let you talk about that one. But I've got for your week 8 waiver targets. How about Cedric Tillman in Cleveland? Owned by 0%. He's a wide receiver 2 he was wide receiver 2 after Cooper. Now Cooper is gone. Watson is out for the year. If they let it fly with Jameis Winston, he's going to have a big rest of the year. Yes. He had 8 receptions on 12 targets last weekend, 81 yards, a 2-point conversion, 14.5 fantasy points overall. So pick up Cedric Tillman. He's not owned by anybody anywhere.
Finished his wide receiver 10, Jeff.
Yeah, not even owned anywhere. So go grab him, put in a waiver for him. Another guy who's not owned by anybody. How about Pittsburgh Van Jefferson? Now that they might have a good quarterback in there under Wilson, again 0% owned. He's the wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh, unless I'm wrong. George Pickens saw 9 targets Sunday night. Jefferson caught 2 of 3, had a touchdown. It's possible that with Wilson under center, this opens up the passing attack, but he had 8.5 fantasy points.
Yep.
And then I'll throw one more out there with you. Let's go Green Bay Romeo Doubs, 45% owned in leagues, back-to-back double-digit fantasy point weeks, 13.4 this week, 18.4 last week. Had 8 receptions, 94 yards on 10 targets. So he's getting plenty of looks in Green Bay.
Yep. I got a few for you too. If Deebo doesn't play, because he was, this pneumonia thing could take more than this week. Ricky Pearsall owned 14%. He dressed last week. He's coming back from that gunshot. He could be much more involved this week. Keon Coleman is actually out there in 57% of leagues. And he scored last week, I believe. And what might be helpful for him is having Cooper take the pressure off of him. He was wide receiver 15 last week, Keon Coleman.
Yep.
7 targets, 4 catches for $125. He could be out there, and he could be someone. He's someone you could pick up because I think he's not going to draw the top corner. We already talked about Bateman, and we talked about this on our Friday show. Troy Franklin, who's emerging as the number 1 receiver right now for Bo Nix, his college teammate. He's coming on. His snap share keeps going up. He's only owned 3% of leagues. And I still like Dontavian Wicks. I still think he scored last week. He's just so hard to trust. But if you have injuries, like I'm in a league where I have Metcalf, who's week to week, and Debo, who's week to week, that's someone, and I may have to start a Wicks or a Pearsall, and then Jalen Tolbert. He could be out there. They're coming off a bye. He's the 2, and if Lamb keeps looking disinterested as he does, a little bit more targets could come his way. He had real good thoughts coming out of camp for Tolbert, and you see why. They said he was going to be much more involved this year, and he has been. Cooks is out, so he's the 2.
Yep. Quick question here. Start Pearsall, Nick Chubb, Bucky Irving, or Kamara in flex, full PPR. I would go Kamara.
Kamara, yeah.
Yep.
And did you mention, not to cut that person off, McMillan, wide receiver for the Bucs? Because he could operate as the top guy. Jalen McMillan.
I didn't, but I kind of hinted at it. He will be the number 1 guy there,
3%,
at least for the
3% owned.
Yep.
So
he'd be
a priority for especially if you're a Godwin or an Evans owner, because there's no way Evans is playing this week.
No. And funny thing, I actually drafted McMillan at the beginning or at the end of one of our drafts and ended up getting rid of him. But a couple other guys. So you mentioned Ricky Pearsall. I still like Juwan Jennings as well. He's owned in only 30% of leagues.
Absolutely. Yes. He might be out there again because people want to drop them.
Yep. He didn't play with a hip injury, but now Ayuk looks to be out for the year. Jennings is still top 20 overall this season. Also, Ricky Pearsall, who you mentioned before, owned in 15%. If Jennings can't go, he would be the number 2 guy because Jennings, like I said, is coming off that hip injury. He may or may not. So him. And then also Tutu Atwell only owned in 10% of leagues. He's still getting targets as long as Cooper Kupp is out. Now, that might change this Thursday night. But usually Thursday nights are exciting. Tutu caught 6 of 9 passes for 51 yards. It's good for 8 points in a half PPR league. But those are a couple of guys that kind of keep on your radar as well. I'll take 8.5 points in my flex spot.
And to back your Atwell point up, I just saw this too. There's rumors now that Kupp is they're listening for offers, and he's on the block for the Rams. So if Tutu Atwell would step right into a role, and Nacua is also, they're opening up the practice window for him, Puka Nacua, so he could be going opposite him, so you could have a new combo there. So he's out there. Cool. That's a good pickup because Kupp may be in another uniform next week.
That would be interesting. All right, well, that's what I've got for wide receivers. There's plenty out there for wide receivers to pick up. Tight ends are getting to be a little bit more predictable. I'll let you start off with the tight ends here, Shawn.
Yeah, I've got, Hunter Henry and Noah Fant had good games last week. Fant was huge in Seattle, a little bit with DK got banged up, but those are 2 that are out there. May was thrown to Henry, and he's made him very viable. And I said this on our show Friday, Cade Otton. I like Cade Otton a lot, and he can be a top 12 tight end here with these 2 guys injured. Those are my 2. And he's been part of the passing game, Cade Otton, for the Buccaneers.
Yeah.
But, him and Henry would be my 2. I don't know if Henry's probably is rostered more, but Otton is a big one. Let me see if I got this for our people here. Otton is owned. He's owned in 33%. And Henry in 35%, about the same. But still, you're looking over 60% of leagues that are out there. That's a lot. So.
There you go. A couple of must starts that I had last week. George Kittle did pretty well, finished top 5, about 12.5 points there. Brock Bowers, of course, top 3 guy, 14.5 points. And then Kyle Pitts was my last must start. He finished with 10 points, which is good enough for top 10. My sits, I actually did probably the best that I have done out of the tight end category. I said not to start Dallas Goedert or Grant Calcaterra. Calcaterra started. He got 1 point. That was it. Dalton Kincaid in Buffalo, 6.5 points, somewhere around 16, 17-ish for the week. So not a top 12 guy. And then Pat Freiermuth finished with 6.1, somewhere around that 18th position. My sleepers, David Njoku, finished number 2, 18.5 points on the week, right behind Jonnu Smith. Wink, wink. Might want to think about picking him up. And Zach Ertz finished somewhere around 6th with 12 points. Unfortunately, my last sleeper was Sam Laporta, did not do much of anything with only 3 points on the week.
And I'm sorry, Jeff, I went out of order there.
No, you're good.
I did the pickups, but I was 1-1 in the tight end. I was with you. We both loved Bowers, and then I had Dalton Schultz in there. I should have listened to you because I think he was one of your sets. He finished his tight end 30, 35. I thought maybe again in that environment he would do a little bit better, but he only had two targets. But he had been averaging like 6 to 8 targets. So Tank Dell didn't do anything either. I think Tank Dell gave a 0 last week, which is crazy. That was a weird game. I expected more points. That Houston just went to sleep, but so did Stroud's. The Texans went to sleep, so I don't know what happened there.
Yep. Week 8 waivers, you mentioned Hunter Henry. He was one of my pickup guys, 30% owned, 8 receptions on 9 targets for 92 yards this last week, 13.2 points overall. That's the 6th highest tight end in fantasy right now. And I had Washington, Zach Ertz, same thing, 30% owned, 4 receptions on 5 targets for 40 yards and a touchdown last week. Gave him 12 points. He's the 8th highest tight end year to date with 47 points. So hard to believe that he is that high up there and nobody's got him. And then Jonnu Smith, if this continues, Smith is only owned in 5% of all leagues. And it's about time I drafted him too, expecting much more. Let him go. Now somebody else has him. Story of my life this year. 7 receptions on 7 targets. So he caught everything for 96 yards and a touchdown. He had 19 points last week. So he's top 15 with 40 points overall. Don't sleep on him either.
Yeah, I got one more tight end because Juju's already been declared out for this week.
Who was? I'm sorry.
Juju Smith-Schuster for the Chiefs. So Noah Gray, they did a lot of 2 tight end last week. And last week, I've got this, it's a small sample, but the last 3 weeks, Gray has a 16% target share and 2 top 15 fantasy finishes for a tight end. So Noah Gray, something out there. They went to a lot of 12 personnel without Juju. So his route shares, he had a season high route snaps last week at 67%. And a 50% route rate, which is a season high for him. So Noah Gray, he's most likely out there. So you can grab him probably for almost for free.
Yeah, you probably could. I know Disley had a big week as well.
Oh yeah, he was monster game.
Yeah.
And that's a tight end offense too. So that's Hurst is on that team too, but Disley had some good time in Seattle, but that's a tight end friendly offense. They're not great at wide receiver either. So
nope. Yeah, not well. They had Johnston was out. Quentin Johnston was out last week. Who knows if he's going to be back again?
McConkey, you already said he did not show well last week at all.
Yeah, McConkey was disappointing. The offensive line didn't hold up very well for the Chargers. Disley might be that dump off guy. He had 12 points last week or over this last weekend.
McConkey had 7 targets. That's not terrible, but he didn't do much with them.
Yeah, Disley had 11 targets, caught 8 of them.
Yeah, he was
that's a big target share.
Yeah, and he had some decent games in Seattle when he was there over the years.
All right, defenses. We've got, I said to start Denver versus New Orleans. They got 21 points. That was number 1 overall. I said to start Buffalo over Tennessee. They got you 12 points, number 7 overall. But then I also said to start the New York Jets. Very, very wrong pick there. They finished with -3 points and dead last, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere near dead last. My sit candidates were the New York Giants. Said do not get involved with them. They finished with 4 points, 18th-ish overall. The Cleveland Browns against Cincy, only 3 points, somewhere around 20th. And my sleepers, Indy versus Miami, they got 11 points. They finished in the top 10. And then my Rams, that I started their defense, I picked them up this week. They were ranked 29th overall coming into this week. You got to watch for the matchups. They played Las Vegas. They got 18 points. That was the second best of the week for defenses?
I had talked about how much I like the Chargers and their schedule, and they had a decent matchup, but they did not do very well. Not a lot of points they gave up last night, but I think it was 18-16, but they finished down here. I've got it. Chargers is defense 22. Another flyer, though, I had talked about was the Commanders, and they ended up as defense, third-ranked defense last week. Who would have thought? And had 16 fantasy points behind only your Rams and the Broncos that you just talked about. So it was a 1-1 for defense for me.
Yeah. Well, if you've got a spot on your roster where you can afford to bring on a defense for 1 week, how about the Detroit Lions? I don't think many people own them at maybe 21%. They're facing Tennessee this upcoming week. That should give them a bunch of points coming up here. That should be a very good matchup. That would be the one that I would say to go after. I know Bears are coming off of a bye, but I wouldn't touch them just because they're going up against Washington. Keep an eye on that Washington, the quarterback situation. I don't think it really matters if it's going to be Jaden Daniels or Mariota. Mariota looked like he was very proficient in that offense. Take that with a grain of salt, I guess, whether or not you're going to play them. I recently picked up Arizona. And Arizona, and again, it's one of these things where it's like you got to look at the rest of the schedule, right? Arizona is one of the worst teams. They're only owned by 1%. But, I mean, they're playing Miami this week, and then they've got Chicago, the Jets, Seattle, New England, Carolina, the Rams. So you got to look for those matchups coming up.
I like the Chargers again. And I'm just going to pull up because from memory, I don't have it. Well, and I'll tell you right now, when I'm looking up Texans against the Colts, as long as Richardson keeps playing quarterback, the Texans are a top play. 6 in sacks per game. Richardson has 7 turnovers in his 4 full games, and the team's only averaging 18.5 points, and he struggles to complete 50% of his passes. Chargers are home against the Saints with the potential probably another Rattler start. So that's the one those are 2 I had. I had picked up the Chargers for long term, so I'm just going to keep riding with them. But the matchup's better this week because if Rattler is certainly not Kyler Murray.
Yep, for sure. Look long term. I've picked up, like I mentioned before, I picked up the Rams. They're only owned by 29% right now. Like I said, they put up 18 points against Las Vegas. Their next few games, Minnesota next week. Not sure if you want to do that, or Seattle the week after that. But then they've got Miami, New England, Philadelphia, New Orleans. Those are all bottom 10 teams. So it is something to where you could start this defense. They will get you points like they did last week. It's all about the matchups when it comes down to defenses.
Yep. I got another update here for our viewers.
Yes, sir.
Jeff, Mike Evans, they're not putting him on IR most likely, but expected to miss the next 3 games with the hamstring. So that's Atlanta, KC, and San Fran. So more props to Jalen McMillan and Cade Otton as the tight end we talked about picking up, because they got to throw the ball somewhere. And you already hit on it early in the show about how well White was out of the backfield, Rashad White.
Yeah, and if you're really desperate, Trey Palmer and Sterling Shepard might get their fair shares as well with McMillan in there. So it just kind of depends on who the number 2 guy will be over the next few weeks. Is probably going to be Trey Palmer. Didn't do a whole lot last night. 1 catch for 3 targets, 16 yards, but you can pretty much expect that to go up. So I would go Trey Palmer over Sterling Shepard, but they will get some use as well out of that. They're not going to stop passing the ball just because those guys are out.
I was going to say, I don't know. I know he's in top 5, but I was looking for the year here. Yeah, I mean, it's not too bad to be tied to the QB2, which is Baker Mayfield. You want some, if that's going to, I mean, he's done it through 7 games. We have to assume, you have to at least take it under consideration, get the passing assets to a guy who's QB2. Now, we don't expect that to stay without Godwin and Evans, who are a big reason why he is, but he's throwing the ball well, completing a good percentage of his passes. 70% completion rate, second only to Jaden Daniels. That's he also leads the NFL at 18 touchdown passes, and also in passing, he's behind only Geno in passing yards with 1859. So I mean, his stats are unbelievable. Baker.
If you can, maybe even go buy low on Baker. Maybe somebody's looking to unload him if they've got a second quarterback that they're planning on starting in there. I know that's the fact in one of my leagues, and I'm definitely going to try to make a low ball offer on Baker and see if I can pick him up.
I don't know who might be panicking, right?
Might be. You know, you lose your top 2 wide receivers, you're probably not going to start the guy.
Yeah, and he's still got like I said, like Otten is a decent, McMillan's okay, Shepard's a possession guy, and then White is dynamic out of the backfield. They're going to use those back. I mean, I think White and Irving are both fantasy viable now because they're not going to. There was rumors that White was going to move away because Irving done so well, but there's no way he's going to be a part of it. I mean, you could see him. Maybe he gets split out wide. You could see both backs at the field at the same time. And you might see some more Tucker, the straight running back, but they got to throw the ball to somebody. Like he's averaging, like I said, you have those numbers. I mean, they obviously want to throw the ball.
So, yeah, and Rachaad White, that's how he got his 2 touchdowns last night.
Yes.
So 6 receptions, 6 targets. He got 71 yards and 2 touchdowns. They're going to continue to do that. That's a recipe that works for him. And then he'll still get, you know, he got 10. He's been pretty consistent with 10 carries over the last 3 games in each game. So
he looked great
still going to get
night.
his piece in there. They're going to do a committee backfield with him and Bucky. So
and Baker is 5th in the league in pass attempts. So we're throwing the ball.
Yeah, 9 rushing attempts for Bucky, 3 on 3, 3 receptions, 3 targets, 54 yards. Yeah. So yeah, it looks like they might just go to their backfield out of.
I mean, those guys are at least they're at least flex worthy.
Absolutely. All right. Who do you guys got this week? Pittsburgh's playing who?
Oh, geez. Giants. I believe it's Monday night.
Oh, too easy. Too easy. Yeah, we got to catch up on you somehow. Jeez.
I know. Yeah, they're Giants Monday night. I actually just started to write up my article, the single game. So I started 2 articles I'm working on. Individual ones is the Cowboys-Niners and at Total Apex Sports and YardBarker and Steelers-Giants. I'm doing those individual write-ups. And in my main DFS, I started. I've actually got my stardoms penciled in. They're not. I got a couple. But I'm going to do a stardom and a lock, but I'll have that out. I'll have that ready by Thursday morning.
Good deal. And then we'll go over it on Friday afternoon again.
Yeah, I always got to. It works, keeps me in line with the Friday show that I know I got to be prepared. So it's actually very good.
Yeah, we get to play the Browns. We're going to Cleveland this week, so that should be fun. And we'll see what we got to go up against there.
Yeah, the defense is decent.
Yeah,
but I think your defense, whoever it is, especially if it's Jameis, they can turn him over. So he's just prone to turnover. So.
All right, my friend.
All right.
You enjoy the rest of your middle part of your week, and we'll be in touch later on. And everyone be back on Friday.
Everybody on Friday. Thank you. As always, thank you for having me too, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem, man. It's my pleasure. Love this.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.